It is July 15th, 2021. My name is Pandit Wright, and I will be conducting a virtual oral history narrative interview with Reverend Irene C. Pierce on behalf of the DC Oral History Collaborative and Asbury United Methodist Church. The Reverend is in her home in Largo, Maryland. Our narrative will explore parts of Reverend Pierce's 95 years on this earth, and we'll talk about her service to Asbury, the General Church, her career in the federal government, and her particular regard and involvement with Africa University. Right now, because I just want to be double sure, I'm going to stop. It is July 15th, 2021. My name is Pandit Wright, and I will be conducting a virtual oral history narrative interview with Reverend Irene C. Pierce on behalf of the DC Oral History Collaborative and Asbury United Methodist Church. The Reverend is in her home in Largo, Maryland. Our narrative will explore parts of Reverend Pierce's 95 years on this earth, and we'll talk about her service to Asbury, the General Church, her career in the federal government, and her particular regard and involvement with Africa University. Reverend Pierce, thank you for your willingness to speak with me. I hope you will enjoy making these reflections, and I know that I now and future listeners will enjoy hearing and learning from them. As we agreed, I'm going to summarize some of your early history because that's already been detailed in a 2014 oral history conducted by the Real World Oral History Project. And that also resides in DIG DC, the Digital People's Archive of the DC Public Library. You have said that country life did not agree with you, and that when the opportunity arose for you to leave Pickens, South Carolina, and come to the big city, even as a 9-year-old, you were more than ready. Having experienced the death of your father at a very early age and your mom moving to Detroit for work, you lived in Southeast DC with your aunt and uncle. In 1935, you began to attend DC public schools and eventually picked Cardozo High School because of its business orientation. And you had decided early on to prepare for a career that would allow you to take care of yourself. Am I right so far?
Yes, you are, definitely.
Okay, all right. What were your first impressions of the nation's capital when you came here as a little child?
Well, I remember distinctively as we drove up Constitution Avenue, coming up the driveway, the light was on the statue of, I think it was President Taft on the hill, and that to me was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen at the moment as we drove past that. So that was Constitution Avenue, yes.
So going to a career, you started as a clerk in the US Treasury Department during World War II and spent the next 40 years proving your ability to learn new things and work hard, taking on new assignments and building a great reputation until retiring from the Department of Commerce as a program coordinator in 1984. Now, you come from a long line of Methodist ministers, and when you first moved to DC, I understand that one of your teachers took kids to a local church for Sunday school. Do you remember that church?
Yes, Ward Methodist Church. We attended it because it's just on the corner of the street where my aunt and uncle lived, and also Mr. and Mrs. Martin, Mr. and Mrs. Martin. And the neighborhood kids all went to that Sunday school.
And then in the 1940s, you began attending Asbury's Sunday school and worship regularly with your neighbors, Blanche and Willie Martin. Let us start your narrative today with the Martins. Who were they in the life of Asbury, and what did they mean to you?
The Martins were very dear to me. And Mr. Martin, Willie Martin, was a member of Asbury, and he and his wife lived right on the corner of Washington Place, near Ward Church, and they both worked in the Sunday school there. We did not have public transportation near the house until later on in life, when Mr. and Mrs. Martin began to attend Asbury together. That is actually when I started to go, and that was in the 1940s. Mr. Martin had been a member of Asbury since the 20s, but he goes back to the pastor, I believe, Reverend Jenkins, just before Reverend Morton Williams. And he was noted for his dedication to teaching Sunday school with Mr. Philpott and other teachers at Asbury. Now, I'm a little unclear as to how he got to Asbury until later on, but he is noted as to walking from his home to his workplace, which was the Bureau of Standards of the Department of Commerce. So he began walking for a long period of time.
So aside from Sunday school, did he hold other positions in the church?
Mr. Martin was a member of the evangel choir, and basically the Sunday school and the choir he was connected with. Now, when Mama Martin started to go regularly, she worked very closely with the senior matrons, and the senior matrons was a group of ladies. They were all ladies that put on plays and bake sales and bazaars in order to raise money for the church. But Mr. and Mrs. Martin supported each other. And when the choir met, she would prepare for them at their house at 42, which is Washington Place then. And the groups would come out there to socialize in their yard. She did not hold a position, but she worked very closely with them.
How many members would you think that Asbury had at that time that would come to church regularly?
Oh, it was a very large church. I would say maybe about 1,000, because during the time, at one point, might have been a little earlier than then. No, it was later. I would say 500 plus.
500 plus.
Yes, it was at least 500 plus, because a few years later, we had to put chairs in the balcony to seat the congregation.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Tell us about your journey through Asbury, the roles that you held there.
Well, when I first went to Asbury, as I said, I worked with the senior matrons, basically, attended Sunday school. And one of my Sunday school teachers was Juanita Morgan, who was an attorney who lived just up the street on 11th Street. You know, that area was all the black community at that time. And Juanita Morgan taught Sunday school at Asbury. My daddy taught Sunday school too, but I was not in his class. I was in Juanita Morgan's class. And so as we progressed on, Juanita Morgan was a lawyer, and she found out that I could type. I don't recall how she found out, but then she asked me to help her do some typing at her house. She lived on 11th Street right up from the church. And so I did from time to time do some typing for her and attending Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
So, later on, I taught Sunday school, and but after teaching for quite a number of years, I began to teach Sunday school along with Mrs. Marshall and Adeline Robinson, Mrs. Colson. We, particularly when our children were small, we taught team teaching in the auditorium. We had so many children that we did team teaching, and we didn't have enough room for all the children.
And after Sunday school, how did you get involved with the United Methodist Women?
Oh, that my involvement with United Methodist Women came about, well, it was a Women's Society of Christian Service, which was the senior matrons actually, and the United Methodist Women were actually the name United Methodist Women came into effect after the reorganization of the church in 1968. Prior to that, there were 3 guilds of women known as guilds for working women, and I belonged to one of the guilds. And then in 1968, after the reorganization, we became United Methodist Women. Now, the first president of United Methodist Women, he was my friend.
Don't worry about the names. Don't worry about the names. Just tell us about your experiences and what it meant to you.
Okay. Well, what it meant to me, working with the church in there, that I was a part of a guild, which we had 2 at that time, and I was the young working guild. And I got a call from one of our seniors named Emma Goldsby, who asked me would I consider being the president of the United Methodist Women. Now this was in 1976, and I had been involved in the church in different programs and working with the senior matrons and being a part of what the pride of United Methodist Women units. And when I became president of the unit, we had over 200 members. So the decision was made that we would break the membership down into groups. So the 200 members was broken down into groups according to the community where they lived. And later on, well, actually, they was from group 1 through 10. They're by numbers. And because group 1 was my group, and in my group, we had Minnie Johnson, Covington, a lot of the younger women who were actively working, and most of them were teachers. Anna Covington was a teacher. Minnie Johnson was a teacher. And the names are not coming to me as how.
That's all right. That's all right.
But most of them were teachers. And there were a few of us also who were government workers. And so there was a blend in the community. And at that time, I was also working in the federal government, and we had at the point where we had consideration of the role of women in the workplace. We had these in United Methodist Women. We discussed the plight of women, and the purpose of United Methodist Women actually was to strengthen the women and to raise funds on behalf of women and children and youth. And we would talk about the woman's place on the workplace and how we got what we did, and women's rights. And because at that particular time, women were not in leadership roles in the church.
Are we talking about in the 70s or back in the 60s when the group came to be?
In the, right now I'm talking about in the early, this is 60s, in the early 70s.
Okay.
That's when the period from actually 1972, and we had changed to the United Methodist Women, and we would think we would have within the overall United Methodist Women was a conference-wide organization, a group of women that ought to be part of United Methodist Women, and to give additional plans for the support of women, women, children, and youth. So, in addition to your church giving, you pledge to United Methodist Women.
So personal giving. Reverend Pierce, I'm going to take you back just a little bit back to the senior matrons. What was the role of the senior matrons? I think you said earlier that they put on plays and they did various things. Were they also focused mostly on women's issues?
At the time, yes. The senior matrons were focusing on women's issues and also the support for the needy and the different needs of the church, because they had people from different areas. We had the senior matrons. There was a South Carolina club. There was another group that would focus on other areas, and connect and at that time we were not connected to church. We were more or less in Sunday school. So, and they were instrumental in bringing women into leadership in the church. Because when Reverend Ford came to our church, we did not have any women ushers, and at the time there was a lady by the name of Alma Green, and with the senior matron, she organized the group. And Reverend Ford created a women's usher board. And so we became, at first it was not, at certain times they would use us, but we then became a regular women's usher board with the leadership of the women and the men. And so
what year was this when Reverend Foy was there?
Reverend Ford came in 1950, something.
And you were there and you had been working there. And when he came, and so the senior matrons, they were the group that brought it to his attention that there were no women ushers?
I would say so, yes.
Okay, all right.
It was the senior matrons of that brought it, and particularly this lady by the name of Alma Green. I think that she was very instrumental in helping to bring this. Bessie Hawkins was another person who was very, very active and outspoken. In fact, she was what you would call the socialite about church. You know, she had weddings and performed at her. She had a special event that we could have weddings performed, and I think she had a connection. I think perhaps she worked with the something in the Pentagon, but she and her, Bessie Hawkins and her sister Irma Goldsby and Mrs. Negro, Minnie Negro. Now these are senior matrons, and Marie. They were very instrumental in bringing to the attention of the leadership of the church the need for women leaders and roles that was there, and the women ushers was one of the main ones. And
when you say that she was able to have weddings, what do you mean?
Oh, and now Bessie Hawkins would have,
Right.
she would plan, she would, she would help you to plan weddings, and she would teach you the proper etiquette. I'm sort of losing my vocabulary to the degree that it's bothering me because I want to say the words that I want to say, but she was just the same. Like in our women's group and how to act properly, do things properly, and she was an advocate for the women and well, in particular the younger women coming forward and going into leadership in the church. Yes.
Did you feel that each role that you held was preparing you for leadership in the church and also in other places in your life?
Yes, I do. Because how I became when so I began with the Reverend Martin Williams. That was when I was introduced to the church in the 1940s. And Reverend Martin Williams had a lot of things going on at the church and activities to be, and the senior patrons, this includes my mama, Mrs. Martin. The church had purchased another building, and they would have a lot to do with what was going on there. And
Do you remember where that building was?
it was on 10th and R Street, I believe. I think it was on the 10th and R Street, and the name isn't coming to me now, but I know it. But this is where we had programs like the kids in Sunday school to participate in different programs in the church, because the church, we didn't have room to have everything at the church. So this is Bessie Hawkins, senior makers. I can't think of her name. I've written it down.
Don't worry, don't worry.
But
But she was instrumental in working with the new building.
you know, Reverend Ford came and organized the church according to the discipline of the United Methodist Church. This was after Reverend Williams now. And after Reverend Ford came and he started with the Women's Usher Board and to plan according to the discipline. So other groups were organized under Reverend Ford. And the building, the church building had become small. And so the recommendation was made on the council of ministers area that we needed a larger edifice for meetings. And the proposal was made to build the building. And it was accepted. So it started, the new building started under Reverend Ford's administration and was completed in 1972 by the time that Reverend Williams came to Asbury. And the dedication of the building actually took place in 1972. So that gave us opportunity to bring into the church building more room for the Sunday school and rooms for the Sunday school teachers and the meeting room. And the next
Talk about when we got into this subject because we were talking about your leadership roles. Were you involved in any different roles after this new building came online?
Well, yes, I was in the Sunday school. I have been in the Sunday school most of the time up until, let's say, around 1972. And then I, when Reverend Williams came, Reverend Williams and I were chosen to represent the Baltimore Washington Conference on the General Board of Global Ministries. Now, how that happened, I don't know. I don't remember. But I was the church's representative to the conference.
What was that like? How did you enjoy that?
Well, it was very enjoyable because once you go from the church to the district to the conference in the church, you are exposed to the broader membership of the church. So you're different districts and different people, and they get to know you and get to know the mission of the church and what's going on and what's happening overall in different areas. And at that time, actually we had 10 districts in this Washington area, 10 various districts, and each church had a representative from the church to the conference level. So the exchange of knowledge and the mission of the general church was carried out through these various parts of the church. And so Reverend Williams and I were nominated to the General Board of Global Ministries at the same time. And I worked in one area with UNCOR. U is UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Living, which was primarily for the relief agency of the general church at that time. And Reverend Reverend Williams was for world divisions, which focused more or less on world missions and what the church was doing in other parts of the world. That gave us exposure as we traveled. We were given the opportunity to travel to different areas and see how other people are living, their faith level, and what they were doing with it. And actually, that experience from the experience of serving in those positions really focused me more into wanting to be in ministry for the church.
All right, before we get there, let me ask you this. Was your travel international? When you were working with UMCOR, had you already started doing international travel?
Yes, I was not doing international travel for the church until I was appointed to the General Board of Global Ministries.
Had you been out of the country just for personal reasons on your own for travel yet?
Yes, I have been. So my job, I work for the federal government, the Department of Commerce, Foreign International Service, and we've had opportunities to not so much as to travel, but as to exchange with foreign service officers, which actually was to tell you and talk about the experience in other countries where they are serving as in the diplomatic corps of from the State Department. And I had that experience, and we were prior to that, we were having these international trade fairs. This is my job, international trade fairs, and men from industry were coming to work for the government because to bring in different types of expertise for whatever was happening for our culture. So you had an interchange there of not so much as travel, but later on in my job experience, I was had an opportunity to travel for my job, and to we had field offices, and you go to those field offices to coordinate the activities between your office and the field office that's going on for the Department of Commerce. And for diplomatic purposes, I think my first trip was to the when the Euro the European Euro
Uh-huh. London?
existed, and there was some money that they wanted the group to take a trip to Scandinavian countries, and where we had projects in there, and we went to go to inspect the project. This is my government job, but also it tied in with my relationship with the church, because we had members on the General Board of Global Ministers from some of these countries, which sort of related to when I finally got there, and I made contact with them.
I want to ask you just briefly, what was it like being a Black woman, an African-American woman, or in those days, a colored woman, going to these different countries, or just having the interactions, the exchanges with people from other countries? What was it like for you?
I felt that no matter that we had something in common, because, well, particularly as a woman, because the women's rights was not as favorable as they were at that time, and we saw entering in on these areas. And when we would go to these countries, we might find one woman, and then here you come. If you're a Black woman, you just, they accept you because you have the position and the reason to accept it. Many times it was cruel. I'm telling you, it was very cruel the way that they would treat you, and but they had to respect you for the role that you played in the agency that you were representing. So,
how did you get to have that role? That's a big honor and responsibility. How do you believe that you got that opportunity?
well, I believe on the global ministries part,
In the government, in your government job?
that was my job experience. And I had, well, in my job experiences, I came into the job. I was recruited out of Cardozo High School when I was 17 years old to work for the Treasury Department, and as a clerk, CAF1, and I was at the Treasury Department for a few years, but each opportunity that I had and that related to typing or shorthand, I was still in school, because I got my high school education at night school, because I was recruited and went to work, and I was taking shorthand and typing. Well, I began taking typing in junior high school, and then when I went to Cardozo, I started taking typing shorthand. So whenever a job would come that was asking for someone, I would apply for it. and I would get it. And there was in government at that time, there was a shortage of males. And then we had women coming down from different parts of the of the country. And there was one white woman who was at the Treasury Department with me at the beginning. And he was from one of um, the business schools up in Massachusetts. She was from there. And she was a stenographer and I was a clerk. And so as I came up the ladder, she came up the ladder too. And she was a stenographer for me. But I became a stenographer afterwards because I applied for the job. And she had never had the experience being around black people. And she became involved with this the black man who was one of the workers in the department. And she confided in me that she hadn't been around us. She didn't know us and how life was. And I have now a card that she wrote me to say that if I hadn't been her friend, she doesn't know how she would have made it. Because first of all, she did not know how to relate to black folks, period. And then she had met this man that she had come in the army with and wanted to be friends with and was told she could not be friends. So it was always right there for us the cans and you can't. You can and you can't. And you sort of I don't want to use the word depend, but you sort of became together. Now, later on in my work life, at the Department of Commerce, as I had gone up the ladder and was to do different jobs, there were these industry men coming in to work for the government. And all of us stenographer in some of those jobs, and they would ignore me. I would be sitting there, and I have been ignored by many of them. But there was this one man from Colorado who came, they were called the $1 a year man. These men that come to work for the government because we were short. And I had to sit at the front desk because for some reason, I don't know why. But anyway, he asked for me to be his secretary. Let me get that. Well, I was not called a secretary. I was a stenographer, and I sat at the front desk. And there was my roommate, my other friend, who was from Pennsylvania, and she was the secretary to the boss.
She was white.
She was white. But she and I became partners in working. She was, well, let's see, she was secretary to the boss. I was secretary to the boss. They weren't calling me secretary. They were calling me stenographer. And so it turned out that this man from Colorado came and he asked that I become his secretary. And this she just passed. She passed 2 years. Well, she was 92. I'm 94. She and I worked together, and people would come into the office, and I would be sitting at Mr. Bergsten's side of the road. They were coming from Mr. Bergsten, and they were coming and see me, and they saw me and go to Wilbur. And Wilbur would say, no, that's Mr. Bergsten's secretary. And so that's the way we worked it. And we worked together. This was later time for a long time. And then we started to go to lunch together. And we would go to that from Pennsylvania Avenue, right across from that hotel, Hogan's. There was Hogan's right there. And we would go there for lunch, you know. And we went to lunch, and she would be sort of hesitant to see how they were going to react. She never talked about race as such, but she was very conscious of the fact, because she told me, she says, you know, I got a sister named Irene, so we became together as Irene and Wilder, and we went there, and so when we would go, they would accept us, and we would have lunch. So with only two people there, white and black together. And it also happened at Woody's department store down there. I had experience with her. So I have had a relationship with I don't want to say it, I think a cordial relationship with white folks who understood that they were privileged, and who shared with me the fact that they themselves didn't feel that way.
You have said that knowing whatever you did, you had to do it well. And that was a part of your leadership growth and philosophy. Where do you think that came from?
I think it came from my early experience in school, particularly in junior high school. I had a teacher who was Nashville, Edna Brown, who was doing her practicum from Dunbar High School. She taught business math, and I had a typing teacher who was a man. I don't remember his name. He taught typing, but she always said to me that you got to know the facts of what you're doing. Plus the fact, let me even go back to elementary school. When I went to Smothers School down from South Carolina, I came here. I was ahead of myself in grades because I had been to school since I was young, because of my mother, and so I was ahead and in math. And then when I went to Smothers, they're still crew. The crews were my cousins. I didn't know that at that time, and I don't know whether my aunt knew it or not. But anyway, they tested me and put me in Estelle's class, and she put me back a grade because of my language and my southern language, she said. And so, she was very particular that I would learn problem. And then also the principal of our school, Mr. Stinson, was the sixth grade teacher and the principal of Smothers School at the same time. And he taught, learn what you were doing. He was very meticulous about before you had to graduate. And once you graduate from Smothers, you had to be qualified to go to junior high school. So I had all of my training was that whatever you do it just to the best of your ability. Number two is to learn and know what you're doing. And if you don't know, to ask.
That is good. Excuse me. That is good advice for everybody, I think. So now let's go back to where we were talking about your work with the council and with UMCOR. You managed to hold your responsible government jobs as well as doing these other positions for the church. How challenging was that for you?
It was very challenging because when I started to travel for the church, I would use all of my leave for church travel. And when I was, my bosses understood that when I would tell them that I was working for the church, you know, even the foreign service officers would come back and they would tell me about the different churches, you know, that where they were from, like Australia and the different denominations of churches that they had in these different countries. And so my work environment was usually as I was there for a time, they accepted me. I would have my leave whenever I had to travel, and I use my annual leave to travel. And in fact, even going back to my schooling, when I was working, I had to use my leave. I went to seminary at Wesley, and the courses I took during the summer, 2 weeks of my annual leave. So my job environment was a way of my involvement with the church, and so they were understanding.
And let's talk now about Africa University. Tell us how did you get involved with it? And you have said that you think it's one of the greatest initiatives the Methodist Church has. Why do you think so?
I think so because with my involvement with the general church, from the local church into the positions that I had for the district and the conference, and we had been in mission in Africa all of these years, and we do not have higher education level of higher education for Africa. We as United Methodists were paying missionaries and paying for the few Africans that could come to the new states and stay, and we're only just one or two at a time. Like for instance, the bishop from Liberia, who was one of the instigators, who was one of the persons who helped to sponsor Africa University. He stayed at our conference center in Baltimore while he was going to school here, and in fact, so when in 1984, he and another African bishop who were directors of the higher education campus ministry put the proposal forth to the United Methodist Church that we should have a higher education institution in Africa. It was brought before General Conference, and it was passed in 1984 to do it. But prior to it being passed to do it, it had been discussed across through all the general board and the other all of the church segment of the need and where the money was going. And at the general board level, we found out that we were spending all of this money, and but Africa was not being educated. We were sending missionaries, and we didn't have that missionaries. Well, let me say a word about missionaries. This is a little, well, you know, the missionaries that were going on were mostly white, and they would go to these countries and say it's a project, whatever the project is, whether it was agricultural, educational, whatever it was, and they became I'm losing my vocabulary. They became princes and princes. They were being treated
like royalty.
Yes, that's it, like royalty. And the church was sending them to these different areas, particularly happened in India. There was a missionary in India, and he had been there for 30-some years. And when I finally got the chance to go to India, she was living at the court. And that's one of the things that I like about our church, that the people that we have on these boards and agencies, they get the opportunity to go to these places, but it's work. It isn't play. It's work. You go to assess where the dollar is being spent and how it's being spent, and so that's one of the things about the United Methodist Church that I really appreciate. So I've been
How long did it take to build the unit? Did you build a university from scratch, or there was already a building that you took over?
No, there was already a building. There was already what they call the women's hostelry, where they were raising piglets, yeah, you know, and it was on the property of where we had a mission school and a hospital, and it was across the road, and for the women's division, when you I think you had, as well as I know this, I have to read things to get it done. They had they were raising funds for the mission school and the hospital, and when the university was accepted to be built, they started holding classes in that facility, and it began out with 14 students, but that was the initial building. And then, of course, when we started after the university project, we began to raise money for the building of the university throughout. And that's where I really appreciate the experience of itinerating in the Baltimore Washington Conference to tell about African University and why we should care and to promote it. Because for the many years that the Methodist Church has been in existence, we did not have it. And so that when the tuition to attend the school that we were paying for a person to come here with the travel and all was 3+ times what we can send a student for at African University.
In their own country. And my understanding now is you have over 1,200 students from 36 different African countries, and you're rewarding bachelor's and master's degrees. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we have an own, we have the African University has an own online service, you know, to other countries now within Africa. You know, this is why I get frustrated, because I know online courses.
Online courses, okay.
Courses that the children in other areas, nearby countries, can take online. So it's both. In the last meeting I went to, they had chaplaincy.
Say that again.
Chaplaincy from the other countries. You know, back in church, chaplaincy. My husband was chaplain, and so now the university has a course for chaplaincy for other African countries, and they're broadening it, and they are giving more opportunities for more people to be educated in different areas, and for more people to come in as partners in Africa. The churches, you know, are telling what we're doing and what needs to be done. See, right now,
You're still on the board of this organization?
Excuse me, I'm not on the board. I am a member of the African University Development Committee, which is the initial committee that was developed to plan for the raising funds and interpreting the purpose for African University. I'm still on that. I am a charter member of that. It was passed in 1984, and the first meeting that we had was here. It was in 1992. But the first meeting I went to Zimbabwe, I went there for the opening and one other meeting. But we're in flux now because of the reorganization of the church that's taking place. And I was just reading it the other night. It's been wonderful as I have been reading the background of where we are, that the changeover, the higher education and campus ministry that eventually that African University fell under. Initially, the Africa Initiative started in the General Board of Urban Ministries, and I was one of the vice presidents of the World Division, and we were promoting raising funds for the Africa Initiative, which fund went to incorporated into the Africa University that was passed in the 1984 General Conference. So that's the beginning of the. So right now, as you state, the number of students that the number of Africans they have an alumni association, and they're giving back, and many of them I have brought here. Well, excuse me, the first Norfolk University was first proposed. They sent the gentleman to the Balfour Washington Conference when I was Conference Secretary of Global Ministries to promote African University, because the Balfour Washington Conference, you know, is the Archdiocese it is the darkest. I think, you know, I don't know. I'm hesitant here because I'm thinking about the Southeastern jurisdiction, which have more Negroes, but I think our conference has more Black folks. But he came here to the Baltimore Washington Conference and to promote African University. And I accommodated him here in my house. He and his wife, and Asbury, because I included Asbury. Most everything that I do, I represent Asbury. I would say everything, but they ask you what church you're from, and I'm from Asbury. But with Reverend Matthews, and the members of Asbury, and I had the so I can look at the papers. I brought them here. They sat out there, and there was a young man going to seminary, and he was from Africa, and he wanted to go back to church. And they joined and met right here in my house and talked about Africa University and how we were going to support it.
But now let's go back to what you were saying before about when you joined the ministry. What was your journey like? When do you remember that you got the call to elevate your journey, another step in your service?
I remember very distinctly. I have always, particularly when Reverend Williams and I were on the board and we started traveling and having some international travel and experiences to see how other people live and the conditions and what have you. It sort of increased my desire to be more helpful. And one of the things that I was at a conference in India, and to a boardroom, we went in. They speak Hindi. We don't know the speaking. But in the conference room where we were meeting, on the side it says that we're partners in God's mission. 1 Corinthians 3:9. That is that is what we are. We are God's partners in mission. If you read that, and I have, when I have spoken across this conference, and in the place as conference secretary, that is the theme that I use, because here we are, cherishing them, and to make it that we are coming together as one. When I was at the Methodist Church, they are known as the Methodist Church, and most of them are called Methodist Church, and the Methodist women, they're more dedicated in most instances, and their faith is very strong, and it's a lot that we learn. So when at some point I talked to Reverend Williams about my interest in becoming Christian, and he sort of discouraged me. Well, we hadn't gotten there yet. So in 1985, I started going to Wesley Seminary, taking night courses. I've been in school all my life, and taking courses. And then it was 1985, and then Josh came in 19. I think when Josh came on board, I talked to him about it.
Wait, say his whole name so that the listeners will know who you're referring to.
Reverend Hutchins.
Okay.
Reverend Hutchins came. That's one of the, that is, in my opinion, that Reverend Hutchins came began to take on what was and to take it forward. He was a great plan, and he and I, well, I guess we clicked. He brought to the church so much. He was on the board at Wesley, and he was a district came from a district. He was district superintendent. He came after Frank Williams, and he was a district superintendent. So he had exposure to more of what the church was doing and what the church needs to do. And then he came to Asbury, and he was our district superintendent before then. And so when he came, and he helped us to strengthen our ministries at Asbury. We brought a Christian education person on board to help us with the Christian education, and he began our non-use Robinson President Harsons this past.
That's all right. Just talk about how you were on the road. So when he came, he supported you in your call to the ministry?
Oh, well, slightly. He wasn't. He did somewhat, but he actually supported. Well, he wasn't against one way or the other. But Mary Brown Oliver became a district superintendent, and she had been with Josh and all. And after I talked to him, I went to Mary Brown Oliver and explained to her what my desire was. And I give her credit for giving me, because she said there was a small church that needed somebody, and she told the district superintendent from that area that I was interested. And that's how I got the opportunity to, I had already started going to school, and then I got the opportunity to be considered for this small church of some, let's see, I think we had 65 to 66 members.
Where was it?
Poolsville, Maryland. And in Montgomery County. It was a small church, the first black church, I'm told, in that particular county that became a family church. And they had a bigger church that was right on the corner, a bigger church, and then this little church for the black folk. And that was one of the great experiences of my life, to go to a people who were love God and wanted to be good disciples and to share things out, but did not feel that they were a part of Methodism overall, because they were being discounted. And I'll tell you personally, I'm a local pastor. See, I was not totally ordained, because when I became eligible to be ordained, I was 72 years old, so they had to retire me. They probably didn't have to, but they did. But anyhow, these churches supported each other. All of these small churches that were family churches, and they supported each other. That's how they existed. But that church became, when I went there, they became knowledgeable. My ministry, my greatest supporting ministry for them was to make them realize that they were a part of the United Methodist Church. And they had two couples there, and to be a part of the conference, or trying to go into part of the conference. And the neighbors out there treated me royally. All white folks. And they welcomed me to the little Poolsville area. And this lady, I don't know her name now, but anyway, they gave me a quilt with my little church on there. And we had a cemetery for black folks. And the developer had bought all this land next to our church and started using part of our land, and we had to take it before a lawyer and to the general church to get them to remove. They could not they could not use our cemetery. We have people there. Well, the society, the Historical Society of Postmen, which was actually this lady who lived all her life, white, because most of them were white people there. And she came and had a conference with, and she told me that the association, they were going to work on getting that church declared a historical cemetery, declared as historical, and that to help us to get a fence to go around the church. And in order to and she worked on it, and we went and found to get a fence. But what they did was they declared the church, the cemetery, the historical church, and I wrote. This helped me to write a book on the church and the cemetery. So that's the only book I've written. It's about Elijah United Methodist Church.
That book didn't come up when I was Googling you. Do you, are you still selling that book?
No, I don't have, I don't have, I don't have, but I have it here. Can you see it?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Hold it up a little higher, and over this way. Okay, so it's a history of Elijah United Methodist Church and Cemetery. And what year was this book?
1995.
What year was it published?
1995.
1995.
1995.
All right. So you were the senior pastor there?
I was the pastor.
The pastor. All right. So we see that you did some great things for them. When did you come back more into official roles at Asbury?
Oh, that was when I retired. When I was retired, and Reverend Matthews was at the retirement meeting. He met me as we were coming out the door. He said, "Now I want you to come back home and be with us." Because even though I was elected, I did not stop going to Asbury for certain things. And plus the fact that Reverend Matthews has been a district superintendent to the one of the all white districts. And of the 10 districts that we had, he was one of those. And I had knew him from our relationship because we had formed a team from the district secretary to interpret the role of the United Methodist Church. So he knew me, and he came after Reverend Pierce. Josh always called him Josh, but I emphasize that. But he came after Josh passed and continued. Reverend Matthews brought to the church. There's some programs that I was very instrumental in. He actually hired me as staff to Asbury, which today that's today in the pastor for congregational life. I was hired. He worked with me and he treated me. I was a part of it. I was part of, and still am a part of the staff at Asbury. It began with Reverend Matthews. I coordinated all of the, the activities for the planning for the nurture, outreach, and witness ministries, which was really decided at that time. So then after when I was fulfilling my mission, then after that, the Reverend Shockley came, and for a while with Reverend Shockley. Reverend Shockley, I did not have the relationship with Reverend Shockley that I had with all the other ministers. And that had bothered me quite a bit because I never understood why. So, but you know, I worked and then later on down with Reverend Shockley, he switched me over to be the another two, and I worked with him until he was ready.
So the important part, though, is that you got to come back home, that you still got to add value to Asbury, your home church, where you were. Let's talk about Asbury a little bit, just in terms of its place in history. When you think about Asbury, going back to the 60s and, you know, what they were to the civil rights movement, perhaps, what is your impression of Asbury's place in history?
I think that Asbury has a primary place in history, particularly in the Washington, D.C. area, because it has been on that corner for 100+ years. And the history is so rich, and the people who have gone there and who began the church, which began on the corner of 11th and K, and has been on that corner for its entire time of these years. And they have brought so much to the area for education, particularly in ministry to children in the community. And so I see Asbury Church, though we are declining because the community now has turned mostly is young, white business folks, I'll say, that we are a light on the hill for many people that lives in distant parts of this area, but also in other parts of the country. When I was doing member orientation for Methodist, people would come back to visit on vacation. They would come say they're coming home, and that's exactly the way I feel. And well, because it's the roots that you have there, and it adds very decline in membership. I think the ministry should prevail, because I believe that as long as you have members who want to support their church, and a lot of people that I talk to now are calling, it's not that many because they're very fast. They say, Reverend Pierce, I love my church, and I join them because I believe that Asbury will be there and will be partners in God's mission for some time. I don't believe well, I know it'll be there for my time, because I'm 95 now. I don't know what God's trying to do. But let me tell you now. Let me tell you, I'm going to say a word about our new pastor, who is not new now, but that's the first woman pastor that we have had.
Reverend Ianther Mills.
Reverend Ianther Mills, who came there at a time, and I don't know everything that happened. He said that was the only time that I had felt that, as you said, out of it, was really shocked. I just sort of let that alone because I just never knew. But I am going to tell you what hurt me. When Reverend Mills came, there was some discussion of the world before, and I was not in town. And when I found wherever I was found out, I went to her. She was a district superintendent, and I went to greet her and to welcome her. Not knowing about what is going on at the church here, because I wasn't there. But when she was inducted into the church, we have a system when a pastor comes, we give them something. And I was excluded from that. And I went out to greet her. She greeted me warmly. But I went out to greet her. Her mother, this is my mother. She said, yes, Dr. Pierce, I know you. You have been with the School of Missions, and we all adore you because you taught us so well at the School of Missions. And she was from the same church that her daughter now is coming to our church. And what hurt me, and I said, was the fact that I was taking a Bible and she, let me tell you how this is cute. Well, it's not cute. I was hurting through. She said, she's a new pastor coming in, right? So she's standing, bringing her the Bible, bringing her this, and I was sitting on that stage, and we found not going to do welcome night. But I had already welcomed her on my own at the other thing. Now that's the only thing I can say that bothered me. But then, as she has been there, she has done so much for the church. Of course, she's very smart, and in my position, I wrote her a letter. Do I have time? Can I read my letter? Well, anyway, can I tell you what I said in the letter?
Yes.
I said to her, I told her why I wanted to be a part of Asbury, and I wanted to know what she knew about me. I talked to her, and then I wrote her a letter, and this is what I said. I attempted to tell my story for the 175th anniversary. However, it was edited by members and was not accepted. But you see, Pastor, I am a product of Asbury, having been introduced to the church by a couple that had mentored me during my early teens and much of my adult life. Oh, I truly believe that God sent them into my life for this special purpose. Will and Blanche Martin became Daddy and Mama Martin. Daddy Martin was my earth father, and you've already said my father decided is deceased. And I cared for them until their demise. Also, teachings and support I have received from members of the Asbury congregation in both my spiritual and secular life have been instrumental in my overall development. No, that's for this reason. I firmly believe that God's plan for my life was planned in the Asbury environment, which has sustained me in many places. His grace has and is my foundation. And lastly, for your information, I was nurtured and supported with Asbury. In 1992, I went into the ordained ministry from Asbury. In 1993, I received my license to preach. In 1994, I was commissioned a local pastor by Bishop Yeagle of the Baltimore Washington Conference and appointed to serve the United Methodist Church. In 1999, I retired from the United Methodist Church because of being 72 years old. In 1999, I was hired as an assistant pastor at Asbury, where I am served as pastor congregation in pastor of Equipping Ministries and presently volunteer. I apologize, but that's very touching to me because it's because and pastor's mother, when he was pastor, the first Sunday that pastor came to church and I came there, pastor's mother met me in the aisle and handed me a cross, a little crochet cross, and hugged me.
And just made you feel so welcome and validated all you have done.
Everything that has been made. And of course, her daughter has proved she's a wonderful teacher on there. But her mother, made me feel wonderful. And we still talk occasionally today.
That's wonderful. As we close, Reverend Pierce, just starting from that very beginning, although you had to work so hard when you came to Washington, D.C., how do you think your life would have been different if you had remained in South Carolina?
Oh, I think in South Carolina. Oh, yeah. In 1983, my then husband and I went to Pickens, South Carolina, where I was born. And I was reared in this tin roof house on the McDaniel farm. And Mrs. McDaniel, my mother worked for the McDaniels, and we lived in their house. And my mother did the ironing. I know she did the ironing. I don't know what else she did. I don't remember the washing, but we drove up into the driveway of the plantation house. And Mrs. McDaniel, a little old white woman, came to the screen, and I stepped out of the car. And she says, "Oh, you are Minnie's daughter." And I had not seen the name since, since I was infant. And so, and she was alone. She was not now alone. She said, "Oh, I wish Minnie was here with me." And we left there. And we went to visit somebody. And we went to a hospital. It was the Cannon Hospital. You have to excuse me. I don't know what this is. It was the Cannon Hospital. And I went into the hospital, and I said, "I am Will Cannon's granddaughter, and that I'm here visiting." And they treated me like I was a kid. They were so warm to me, and they showed me the hospital. I mean, around they gave me a treatment hospital, and it's the same name. So I think that if I were to still be in South Carolina, I would be very comfortable. But things have changed, and I would believe that I would be an instrument for the change on behalf of us, the church. And many of my friends who have gone back home to South Carolina have said that the things are just wonderful where they are. they are a part of the change now to speak for what is right and for justice for all. That's what I would be doing.
What has been your greatest blessing?
That's my greatest blessing is in having my daughter. My daughter had two granddaughters for me. And being blessed to be blessed and doing the things that I do. I think that life in itself has proven to be more or less what you make it as such, and the contribution that you make. But you say that you can, but you speak for what's right, stand firm for what's right. And I believe that, I believe that I am a servant of the Lord who is firmly believing that I am being blessed. Things are happening with me and for me. And I just want to be a good servant and to tell my granddaughter I have 5 years. I'll be 95 this year. And the grace of the Lord has been wonderful. It's been good.
Anything else that you would like to say before we close our time today?
Oh, I want to tell, yes, there was something I want to say. I want to say about the people that I have met within my life. And through my work environment, and particularly at the Department of Commerce, where I worked very diligently to improve the working conditions for women there. And then also being able to have that person, Mother Teresa, and Calcutta, and to see her in the world, but to see her, the baby, one of the babies, Jesus, in home, and to experience her around a big pot of food that we have on the street for people coming by for the hump and the bishop and the other said to me, to her, and passed on, how do you exist in this environment? She said the Lord provides. It's a wonderful thing to happen. And also to have been able to be meet with the first Black bishop that was elected to the United Methodist Church. And the first woman too, but Bishop Roy Nichols from New York was the first Black bishop to be able to meet these folks that represent us and that have caused the change to take place. What we do. They have stood their ground and which to go. I was privileged to go back to the board to serve the first Japanese bishop that the church had in 1984. And Bishop Santa, and being Japanese and the feeling of the Japanese to the Americans, you know, how that goes. And his experience, his sharing with us the feeling that our church can come together and how to make changes of people. This is that tune, that saying, together we can do it. But see, people hate people until they get to know the people. So for me, having had this experience has helped me so that I really feel fulfilled that I have seen all of these things and I have had the comfort to serve.
Thank you, Reverend Pierce, for a life of service and dedication and beauty, and for sharing some of your insights and reflections today. I appreciate it so much. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Take good care.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I love you.